Hello, welcome to episode 3 of Experiences with God. I'm Ron Papalardo. One of the most common experiences with God is something called a prophetic dream. In fact, many of the messages from God that are recorded in the Bible originated with dreams. You might be familiar with one of the most famous episodes. This took place in the first book of the Bible, called Genesis, and it's the story of Joseph and the Pharaoh of Egypt. So Joseph had been sold into slavery, wound up in prison in Egypt, and while he was there, he interpreted a dream for this person, and the dream came true. And this person went on later to become the official cupbearer to the Pharaoh of Egypt. Pharaoh is like the king of Egypt. So one night, the Pharaoh had a very disturbing dream. He had that very vivid dream. And in this dream, he saw 7 really fat cows, full of meat and, very delicious cows, these 7 cows. And then he dreamt 7 skinny cows appeared and they devoured the 7 fat cows. And this was very troubling to him. So when he woke up, he consulted all of the priests, and the different soothsayers of his kingdoms, asking, can somebody tell me what the meaning of this dream is? And nobody could. So the cupbearer, who knew Joseph, and Joseph, by the way, was still in prison, I think, and he said, "There's this guy that I met in prison, and he can interpret dreams." And so the Pharaoh said, "Well, send for him. His name is Joseph." So they brought Joseph to the palace, and Pharaoh said, "Can you interpret this dream for me?" He says, "Well, it's not really me, but God may give me the interpretation of the dream. Go ahead and tell me the dream." He says, "Well, I had this dream of these 7 fat cows that got eaten up by these 7 skinny cows, and I don't know what it means." And so Joseph, he meditated on that, and it came to him very clear what the dream meant. He said, "Well, the 7 fat cows represent 7 years. For 7 years, for the next 7 years in Egypt, the harvests are going to be good. There's going to be plenty of food. It's going to be a real fat time. The cows are going to be full of meat and so on." He says, "But after that, there's going to be a famine, a drought, and the rains won't come and so on. And so you're going to have a really bad harvest. So it's going to be a really tough time of famine in the land. And what I recommend you do is actually, for those 7 fat years, is create some storage facilities and store up as much grain, and dried fruits and, whatever you can, so that when the 7 famine years come along, there will be enough food to feed the people." Now, the Pharaoh was so impressed with Joseph and the interpretation of the dream, he took it very seriously, that he appointed Joseph as like the prime minister of the country, and he gave him the authority to arrange this, to set up the storage facilities and so on. And long story short, it came true, just like Joseph said: 7 fat years, 7 lean years. But because they had made preparation, they saved countless lives by paying attention to the message that was conveyed through this prophetic dream, as God was trying to speak to the leader of the country through a prophetic dream. Now, one important thing to know about prophetic dreams is that oftentimes the images and symbols that we receive in those dreams are symbolic. They're not literal, they're symbolic. And so it can be a challenge to discern what is the meaning of the dream. That's why Pharaoh had such a hard time, and he had to find Joseph, who had this prophetic gift, who could figure it out for him. So I'm going to give you an example from my own life of a prophetic dream. Again, there were a lot of symbols and images in this dream, and then explain what the symbols meant. So I had this dream, I don't know, a few years ago. And in this dream, I was at a banquet. I arrived at this huge banquet hall. It was it was kind of like what you would find in a really large hotel or a convention center. And it was a room, it probably seated over 500 people. And it had those big round tables where 10 people could sit at a table, and there's white tablecloth. So it was a really high quality banquet in this large banquet facility. And in the dream, I walked in from the back, and actually the banquet had just ended, and all the people were leaving. They were going out through the exit doors on the different sides. And I noticed that way up in the front, there was what's called a head table. There was like a raised platform, and there was a long table where, the dignitaries sat. And I noticed that there was still a guy sitting at the table. There was one guy, he's like a very distinguished looking gentleman, and he was sitting right in the center chair of this head table. And somehow I knew in the dream that this was God, that, God was appearing in the form of this man. So I thought to myself, wow, that's really cool. God's sitting over there. Maybe, if I kind of make my way up to the front of the banquet hall, maybe I can get a chance to talk to him. That would be great. So I started walking up slowly up towards the front. And when I got right to where I was standing in front of the head table, and God is sitting right there. First of all, I noticed that he was kind of, he was in a reverie. He wasn't like really, first of all, he didn't notice me, and he wasn't, he was just kind of very still, lost in thought, something like that. But when I got to the head table, I looked in front, and he had a dessert plate, and on the dessert plate were those giant chocolate chip cookies. The ones you might find at a really nice bakery or like Starbucks coffee, a lot of coffee houses. They're about this big, these big chocolate chip cookies. And I love those things. And he had a stack of them on this dessert plate. So the first thing I thought was, imagine, you meet God, what are you going to ask him? But the first thing came out of my mouth was, hey, excuse me, could I have one of those cookies? Now, when I asked the question, God, he looked down and for the first time he noticed me, and immediately he broke into this big smile, this really, really beaming at me. He was so happy to see me. And immediately he reached, I remember he had his really big hand, he reached over to that pile of cookies and grabbed as many as he could, and then he handed them to me. And that was the end, and that was the end of the dream. I woke up after that. So when I woke up, I immediately, because I know about how, prophetic dreams, I stopped and meditated to try to see if I could get some understanding of what the dream meant. So I prayed to ask, what is the meaning of this dream? Realizing it wasn't about chocolate chip cookies at all. There's symbolic meaning to it. So what I came to realize is, number one was this, is that God sometimes in our lives may seem distant, but oftentimes God will not come into our lives without being invited. So somehow it was important that I initiate when I asked a question. And the second thing is that God is waiting for us, but God is really excited when we communicate with him, because it gives him an opportunity to communicate back. So as soon as I let my presence be known, he just lit up with a big smile, and he was fully, just fully present for me and me alone. The next thing I realized is what the chocolate chip cookies represented is what I really want, like what I really want. That's one of the things I like the most in life. So the symbolic meaning is that God he wants to give me what I really want. But here's the thing. I asked for just one cookie. He gave me like 5 or 6 of them. So what I realized through that is that God actually wants to bless us more than we can even imagine, more than our small minds can imagine. He wants to really give us everything that we need, that would be for our highest good. So that was the meaning of the prophetic dream. So what can I leave you for your own spiritual path? You can actually facilitate a prophetic dream. Recently, a few months ago, I had a nightmare. And so the next night I prayed, dear God, please stay with me while I sleep, and please visit me in my dream. And within a couple of weeks went by, but within I'd say within 3 weeks, I had a dream, and God appeared in the dream. And the cool thing about this is I didn't just get symbols and images, but God actually spoke to me. It was only like about 2 sentences, but it was something really deep and profound and had a really amazing effect on me. So I would invite you to invite God to come into your dreams. And who knows, you might have a prophetic dream. If you do, let me know all about it. If you want to know more about prophetic dreams, I wrote about it in this book. It's called Reconciled by the Light, Book 2. Reconciled by the Light, Book 2. And that can provide you with more information. Thank you for listening to the video, and I pray for your highest good.